Steven and Steven.
SS.
Yeah, something like that. We'll sort out the details. So what we were discussing the Giulietta,
Yes.
and just why it's a popular car in South Africa. It was best-selling. Well, Alfa's best.
In the 80s. I suppose it was also it was a very effective family car. You know, it was a good medium-sized car. Had the same platform as the Alfetta, which was a bit more upmarket, had a boot and all the rest, or bigger boot. Didn't do too badly on the track. Was the family man's version of the Alfetta, because it basically had the same platform.
But what made the Alfetta not the family man car?
I think it was bigger and a little bit less sporty. Both of them interestingly won tow car of the year at one stage in different classes. I think the Giulietta was probably a little bit, well, it was more sporty. If you drove it, it did feel all sort of light on its toes.
But it was designed also for handling.
Absolutely. I mean, front engine, rear gearbox and diff. So it had close on 50-50 weight distribution, front and rear. So they handled well, but they were comfortable. I mean, at that time, you know, if you wanted a car to handle, generally the way you got it to handle was to give it stiffer springs and shocks. Whereas the Giuliettas were actually quite comfortable and they handled inherently well.
But then, okay, so the car in the shop, so that particular one, what's the story on that one specifically?
Okay, so the story on that one, my client who it belongs to, his first Alfa, as many people would say, was a Giulietta. So hence the 80s Giulietta. So he came across this particular car standing under a tree in the estate where he lives. Very sad. So I guess it was a garden find, not a barn find. State of the car was, body-wise, it was terrible. It was very badly rusted. But what made it special was it's a one-owner car. For its age, very low mileage. The original owner, when Alfa pulled out of the country in 85, he decided he still wanted to realize his ambition of owning a Giulietta. So he rushed down to the nearest dealership and told him he wanted to buy one. And they obviously humoured him, supplied him one. The Musso spec, if I remember correctly. But the interesting thing is, because it's one of the last of the cars, there's some interesting details on it. The upholstery is the same, shared the upholstery material with the GEV6, which is very unusual. I've never actually seen one like it before. And it had the last incarnation of the throttle linkages and stuff.
Obviously the upholstery is not there at the moment. It's
yes, it's in safe storage. So the upholstery was perfect. It was absolutely mint. So that was the attraction. One owner car, matching numbers, original, everything original. Perfect interior, except for the dash by the window from the sun. Got a little bit of sun in the dashboard. But the upholstery's basically been cleaned up and it'll go straight back into the car and it's done.
Sure.
And we did the exercise of starting the car, went through the whole procedure, getting the oil pressure up, all that sort of thing. And the interesting thing is, when we started looking at it, we realized that it looked like it had just come back from service, because the oil on the dipstick was clean. So the guy basically serviced the car and parked it.
How long have you been standing there?
Who knows? 15 years.
Sure.
Guessing. From the deterioration. It used to be his family holiday car. He used to drag a caravan around behind it. Still got the tow bar on, which I still must actually take off. But he looked after it, mechanically looked after it very well. It's just sad that he parked it under a tree. But that probably saved the upholstery.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of metal work here. Actually, what we did to the car made no sense. Saving it made no sense. It should have actually become a bit of something. But strangely, there used to be gazillions of them around, and now there's hardly any left.
I mean, I remember seeing them. I mean, this is like 20 years ago. I remember seeing them, and then they had rust issues. So
I mean, the older members of the Alfa Club will tell you that in the 70s, you used to find new cars on the showroom floor with rust on.
Wow.
And neither confirm nor deny that. Then also, let's be fair, the lady does protest too much. In the 70s and 80s, the cars all rusted.
True.
No.
My dad's the bins resprayed like twice over, and you could see all the layers.
Exactly. So Alphas were a little bit quicker on the rust, but they were a little bit quicker on the pull away as well. So, you know.
And then I was like thinking, okay, so you, like as the story goes, you ran to the Alfa dealership, and it's like, if you're gonna buy Alfa. Now this is obviously a subject of different strokes for different folks, but why that Alfa is now the question, because we talked about styling. It's not the most inspired, but you could say that about a lot of 80s cars. It's just that, okay, there seems to be, and I even read it in that book, a devoted, what did they call it? There's a hardcore devotees.
Here we go.
Yeah. there's a few of these sort of niche pockets of, you know, enthusiasts, and it's just like you can't shake them. But it's like, why? I don't get it.
But that's an Alfa thing. That's not a Giulietta thing. That's an Alfa thing. I mean, I was a dyed in the what's this expression? Dyed in the wool BMW fan. And then I bought my first Alfa just before a couple of days before I turned 21. And hardcore Alfa steer ever since. Just something about the cars. They were never cheap new. But if you could find a good used one, it was serious value for money because they were fun to drive. I guess I'm eccentric. I like driving something that everybody else isn't driving. So styling wise, nothing compares. Remember in the 80s, they were still way ahead of their competition, mechanically wise and design wise. Some of it was a little bit quirky, but you know, it was a wonderful handling thing because of the weight distribution. But the this gear selection was not ideal. You couldn't do like a racing change with it because you just make noises. But once you got the hang of it, it didn't really bother you too much. But it was a little bit something that took getting used to, because you basically got two flywheels. You've got a flywheel against on the motor side, and you've got a flywheel on the gearbox side. So there's a whole lot of inertia in the drivetrain that you need to get used to. But I mean, from a technology point of view, I mean, starting in the 60s already, you know, twin cam engines, disc brakes all around, brilliant handling. What's not to like?
So I put that little sort of as a thumbnail. I had the 80s Corolla and then this Giulietta. Because there's a guy that lives down the road from me who restored a 1980s Corolla. I don't know where he found that thing. I saw him driving. They just got the engine running. The thing didn't have doors, but they were driving down the road. Like those ones. And I've seen them on Marketplace. The Giuliettas, anywhere between 80 and 130. 130k. I mean, they hold their value very well.
I know of one that sold for 200, and I know of another one that sold for 160. Sure. They were pristine though.
But then it's like, we talked about like 80s car styling. Like, you know, the old Volvos. I think BMW kind of escapes that sort of boxy. They were never really boxy. The first 3 series wasn't, that had curvy lines. So I kind of think they're exempt. I was trying to piece this together myself. Was it just that Alfa was more exotic than your run-of-the-mill, the Germans and Japanese?
Yeah, as I said, it's always been a different car. And I think either you love it or you hate it. Boxy, yes, but compared to the other boxiness of the 80s, it was like at least it was a wedgie box.
Well, we spoke about like the rear end of it. Like, it's not a pretty rear end. by anyone.
Beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. Never
But
forget
even
that.
but there's even Alfa Romeo guys that is like no.
As I say, it's fortunately everybody's taste is different. You know. Yeah, I personally preferred the Alfetta styling at that stage of the game, and I ended up buying GDVs. They're way prettier.
But that
But
that's
it's not
universally
exactly
accepted.
Yes. And I managed to pull off using it as a family car for a couple of years until the kids got too big. But yeah, I think it was probably more the performance than what it was the styling per se. And if you died in the wool fan, you're a died in the wool fan.
Sure. Because I was thinking of the trend, right? Okay, Alfa Romeo, let's say there's a trend. If you look at that and the rear end styling. Now obviously we mentioned the 166, which is a loved or hated design. Is it the 145? But there was a few that's like, I know the more modern one, the Brera, is also not like front end beautiful, rear end
Not so much.
not so much, yeah. And there's that sort of you can see a number of Alfa Romeos that have that sort of trend of.
Look, they're always different. They're always just plain different. I mean, the 147 came out with hidden rear doors in the sense that
the door handles.
the door handles were hidden.
That
Then
was supposed
Alfa
to
moved
mimic
on
the
from
coupe
that.
kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Alfa moved on from that, and now there's a couple of other manufacturers that are actually doing it.
Yeah.
When the latest incarnation of the Giulietta came out, it's a car that I've never really, at the risk of being shot, the styling has never appealed to me except the rear taillights, which I think are really pretty. And it wasn't a year later, there was an Opel that came up looking very similar.
But I was thinking of the historical context as well. Apartheid and limited numbers of imports or limited car makers in the country. Some pulling out, some staying, and then so your pool is a lot smaller to choose from compared to Europe, for instance. And that obviously influences the popular trend at the time.
Bearing in mind, of course, we had our own factory.
Alfa.
Alfa. We were the only country outside of Italy to manufacture, which I'm sure was an advantage from a costing point of view.
We're hot! We're live! Where are the mics? Second bite!